I talked all last week about what happens in the aftermath of Buck Showalter and meeting up with Peter Angelos, and none of us are predicting anything weird to happen there. We always tell you, subscribe to the WNST Tech Service brought to you by Coons Ford. You never know when something sudden is going to happen, and right around 9:31 a.m. on Monday morning, things happened, and Luke Jones and I were on that. Of course, the WNST Tech Service got it to you. Mark Trestman fired as the offensive coordinator of the Baltimore Ravens, now moving on to Marty Morningwig. Luke, you and I did a lot of radio after the game on Sunday, and this loss to the Redskins and how this was going to play inside the building, inside the offense, where they are with Flacco. And this is not an unprecedented move, and I talked to Brian Billick about that. You can hear that in the Buy a Toyota audio vault as well. This isn't out of character for John Harbaugh to say, I don't like the way this smells, I'm going to do something different.
Well, I mean, you go back to 2012, and it was, interestingly enough, and I think we even touched on this in some of our post-game, it was a loss to the Washington Redskins that spelled the end for Cam Cameron. After a near 5-year tenure in Baltimore, Mark Trestman didn't get nearly as long. We talked about the fact that last year was difficult to really evaluate the job he did with all the injuries, with the lack of speed at the skill positions, but at the same time, we said that there had clearly been some red flags. The lack of commitment or productivity or both when it comes to the running game, and a passing game that just never really seemed to have any rhyme or reason, was just disjointed. We saw this year the lack of vertical shots, and last year didn't really have anyone capable of doing that. But it never felt like it was clicking. And again, you could forgive the final half of the season last year because they had a preseason-like personnel, group of personnel. But as I wrote at WNST.net late Sunday night, even the most even-keeled observer had to question, had to wonder whether Mark Trestman was putting this offense in the best position to succeed. And that's not to say it was all his fault. The offensive line has had its struggles, has had its injuries. Receivers have dropped passes, have struggled to gain separation. Joe Flacco has not played his best football, even though I wouldn't put him at the top of the list of issues by any stretch. But he's played better in his career. He needs to play better. But you just go down the list, and you kept coming back to, is Mark Trestman really, is he grasping what he has here? We talked about it at length with the running game. I lost my mind talking about the running game pretty much, how you run as well as the Ravens did in the first quarter and then run 8 more times the rest of the way on Sunday. It was clear that this wasn't working. And this should not be something that's celebrated by Ravens fans, even though I know they will.
Trestman wasn't here long enough to get really hated, the way Matt Cavanaugh was, or I mean, or the way Billick was, or
Cam Cameron,
or Cam Cameron, obviously, who was the king of all of this. But yeah, I mean, the fire Trestman stuff. I mean, there's not even a website. I don't even know if there's a hashtag at this point. So I mean, this was.
I did see a hashtag.
You did see a hashtag. Okay, well, I mean, hey, it is new media, as you once said. But I want to go back to Sunday afternoon because you and I and several other people who cover the team, the sane people that cover the team, and there are only a handful of those. I'll let you figure out who they are. But you and I and a couple of people that I actually get along with in the Ravens media corps were after the game saying, boy, this is a weird locker room. It was incredibly silent in the locker room. I mean, you and I looked at each other and were like, wow, this is a different kind of loss in here. And there were some little huddles of wide receivers and linemen, and no one had anything to say. Marshall Yanda literally, for the first time in his career, said to the media, I'm not saying anything because I'm afraid of what I would say. And Steve Smith was kind of a jerk after the game and sort of shooing away the media and saying, we're all pissed, that's it, that's all I've got. No one wanted to say much because of the fear of what was being said, I guess, right? And now we find out the next morning, this was far worse than we thought, right? I mean, and John's good at covering all that up, and I wrote about it in the book 4 years ago. That's how they won a championship, that this doesn't sort of leak out at 10 o'clock at night, that there's a fire. I mean, this was very, very sudden on Monday morning, you must admit.
Oh, sure. Well, I mean, from the standpoint of it's 5 games into the season, from the standpoint of what I did say in that Mark Trestman absolutely deserved a pass last year. Now, that doesn't mean he did a good job either, but it was just very difficult to truly and fairly critique the job he did last year because they had such personnel deficiencies. But, it just didn't seem like there was any direction. I mean, 5 games into this thing, we were talking about this. What's the identity of this Ravens offense? And it's just, gobbledygook. I mean, it was just, nothing. I mean, just short passes, no getting from point A to point B. It felt like, certainly the running game. I felt that, any excuse he could possibly use to move away from the run, it happened. They'd run, they'd get some chunk plays, they'd get some yardage, and then the next run would be for 1 yard, and they'd throw the next 9 plays in a row. I mean, that's just what we were seeing, and I think it was very clear in that post-game locker room how much frustration was there. You could see it with Joe Flacco. I mean, Joe was asked at one point if he thought any changes were warranted, and it wasn't even necessarily saying that, do you feel Mark Trestman should be fired? It was, do you think that changes need to be made to this offense? And he started off just by saying, I'm not going to get into all that. And when a player says something like that, and it's not, and again, he wasn't asked specifically about Mark Trestman, but when you just say you're not getting into that and you're not defending the coaching or the plan or the scheme, then that's pretty telling. And it really, you could tell. I wouldn't say Joe Flacco was despondent on Sunday about it, but you could tell he was at a complete loss for words as far as how that offense performed against Washington after the first quarter. I mean, that was as bad as it gets. Didn't convert a single third down. We talked about how they moved away from the running game. Flacco throws 46 times and barely eclipses 200 yards, 210 yards on the day. I mean, that's horrendous football right there. I mean, that is not even close to being what an offense needs to be successful in this league. And I think John Harbaugh had to look at this and say, look, I don't know if we're the most talented offense in the NFL, and I don't think anyone would make that argument, but I think most people look at this collection of personnel and say, this team should have a chance to have a pretty good offense. Certainly not to be a team that gets shut out over 44 minutes at home against the bottom 5 defense statistically in the National Football League. That's just, as Harbaugh would say, that's below the line. That's far below the line. And I think the Ravens felt that Mark Trestman was not putting them in the best position to succeed. Now, again, this isn't good news. Making a coaching change in the middle of a season, and a lot of people are going to talk about, when Brian Billick fired Jim Fossil in 2006 after a 4-2 start and 2 straight losses. It's kind of interesting how it's the timing of that somewhat similar to what we saw this year. And so many people will talk about Cam Cameron in 2012, but go look, and not talking specifically to this organization, but you look around the league and you see teams that are firing coordinators in the middle of the season.
Well, it smacks of desperation on the outside, right?
Yeah, sure. It speaks to not having any conviction to begin with because you're dumping a guy after 5 games. And look, I'm guessing this is probably the right decision based on what we've seen. I mean, the results are the results. I mean,
this was a shotgun marriage. I mean, maybe we should go back to the beginning of this, right, where Kubiak wasn't leaving, was incredibly happy here. John Elway, came calling twice. He even issued a statement that he wasn't leaving. And then the next thing you know, John Harbaugh's going to go out and find an offensive coordinator in the next couple of days, right? And that's kind of how this thing happened. And Trestman had, some history with his brother and the family and whatnot. But this hasn't been a very fruitful marriage, really. I mean, and I opined on Sunday, and look, I haven't talked to Joe about this, and I talked to Joe about a lot of stuff, and at some point I'll talk to Joe about it, and Joe will probably be pretty candid about it, quite frankly. But you don't mesh with everyone. I talked to Brian Billick about it. You can hear that in the Buy a Toyota audio vault. That you don't always mesh with people and with personalities and with philosophies. And it's not like Joe Flacco and Mark Trestman got together and had a retreat for a weekend and came out and said, yeah, we can make this work. But instead, you got a $25 million quarterback, and here, meet your new guy. I hope you guys get along. He just got fired in Chicago for not being able to figure it out. You guys go figure it out. And clearly from our eyes as fans, it's not working. Now, why it's not working, that's up for people that are above our pay grade, as we would say. But the running game isn't broken. The running game was working. This really was about play calling, and I got to think that Harbaugh did not like what he saw, period, and felt like it was unfixable from a relationship standpoint with Trestman.
Yeah, I mean, it just it never seemed like it really fit. And even last year, when we talked about this, I mean, it's not as though there was any smoking gun incident, but there were times even last year before Flacco got hurt when he talked about wanting to be more aggressive and pushing the ball down the field. Now, the problem last year is they didn't have Mike Wallace. They didn't have Rashad Perriman on the field. They didn't have even a Chris Moore kind of individual to take shots down the field. I mean, I guess you could say Chris Givens, for a guy who did nothing with the opportunities that he was afforded last year. But, I mean, it just, again, just because you give Trestman a pass on what happened last year doesn't mean that there weren't some concerns there. And I hear what you're saying. I mean, clearly this team didn't want Gary Kubiak to leave, but at the same time, they replaced him very quickly with Mark Trestman. I mean, that was done. They did not do an extensive search in the same way that they did the year before to replace Jim Caldwell with Gary Kubiak. Now, is that because they felt really comfortable with the processes that they'd used and that they felt that they had their guy in Trestman? Well, if so, then they clearly picked the wrong guy. So they could have taken their time a little bit more. It's not as though Gary Kubiak left in July or anything like that. So it's really no excuse to just say, well, they lost Gary Kubiak and they were stuck with Mark Trestman. There were other people out there. There's always the next great coordinator is always out there. You just got to find them, and I'm not saying that's easy, by the way. But
let's talk about Marty Morningwig a little bit because part of this was a lot of relationship with John Harbaugh as well. I mean, Marty Morningwig and John were close in Philadelphia, right?
Yeah, no, I mean, Marty Morningwig's someone who has a lot of experience. Of course, people will remember him as the head coach of the Detroit Lions and had no success whatsoever in that role. But this is a guy that has been an offensive coordinator at a number of places. San Francisco. He was the coordinator in Philadelphia for 6 or 7 years under Andy Reid.
Well, all he's ever done is offense, right? I mean, that's his calling card is working with quarterbacks and running offenses. That's been far more his calling card than the failed stint for a couple of years in Detroit at the turn of the century, right?
Yeah. So, I mean, we'll see how it works out. I mean, he's worked with, if you look at his Wikipedia, he's worked with 5 different Pro Bowl quarterbacks, worked with Brett Favre at one point in his career, worked with Steve Young. I mean, but at the same time, Mark Trestman have worked with some pretty good quarterbacks. So, I mean, we'll see. Anytime you make a change like this, I think it's always very easy to say that the eternal optimist is going to say things are going to be better, things are going to be fixed, and the pessimist will say, well, it's a problem when you fire your coordinator after 5 weeks, just like it was a problem when the Ravens fired their offense coordinator after week 14 back in 2012. That wasn't anything to be proud about. It's never something, in my mind, I know fans will celebrate it, but it's not something to celebrate because it shows that your football team's broken. And maybe Marty Morningwig can fix it.
Marty Morningwig has coached Steve Young and Brett Favre. He's been around. I mean, obviously, on work with Mariucci. I mean, you go through all of this. This is probably Johnson. I'd rather have him than him to some degree, right?
Yeah, I mean, and again, we'll see. I mean, he very well could fix things, and this team could look like, this offense could look like what they envisioned as far as being, at least top half of the league, a top 12, let's say. Do that coupled with the improvements they've made on defense, then this team should have a good chance to make the playoffs still. To play that kind of football. But it's clear this, and we said this after Sunday's game. The offense wasn't improving. They had. You could talk about they were running the ball better. How much of that was something they discovered, and how much of that was facing Oakland and Washington. And even though they had run the ball better, they still weren't running it more. They still were shying away from it. And the passing game was clearly going backwards in a dramatic fashion. I mean, it's clear, some of the high points that they had, the Cleveland game after the first quarter and Jacksonville when they threw 21 straight completions, those high points were waning big time, and we're seeing more and more of the passes behind the line of scrimmage, passes short of the first down marker, just too much throwing, not enough throwing downfield. I mean, just
too much short throwing.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, just it wasn't working. There's no doubt about it. And whether it was going to be now, whether it was going to be the bye week, which I was really thinking, if going into Sunday's game, if you had told me the offense would struggle again, I'd say, you know what, the bye week might be a time when they make change. But I think it was so dramatic on Sunday, and again, Washington's defense was lousy statistically going into that one. Now, maybe they turn it around. Maybe they start playing better football defensively. They've got some good players in Josh Norman and Kerrigan and a few others, but overall that unit has been poor in 2016, so I don't think you can just continue to wait around and hope it's going to get better, especially when you saw the tone of that locker room after the game. And
it was kind of a spooky locker room. It was kind of foreboding. Like there was a different feeling in there, and I actually tweeted about what a different feeling it was in there, and so many guys didn't want to say anything. And boy, that's that's a very unusual Ravens locker room, even after a loss, I would say, and they do lose around here a little bit.
Yeah. I mean, it was definitely. You could tell that there was real concern. I mean, look, they lost to Oakland last week. You're going to lose some games.
They lost by a point, man.
Yeah, I mean, they don't go as well as they play at M&T Bank Stadium. They don't go undefeated at home most years. They're going to lose one or two most years, even when they're at their best. But Sunday, that was just as ugly as it gets. It started so well. If the game ends 5 seconds into the second quarter, they're winning 10-6. So I mean, it was something that it was clear that either there was going to have to be a change with Trestman, or there was going to be a significant moment where John Harbaugh sits down with him and say, "Look, major changes need to happen. I mean, this cannot continue the way it did." And Harbaugh clearly felt that they could not continue in the same direction, and I think, based on the results or lack thereof, hard to argue this. Again, even the most objective observer had to be asking, look, offensive line injuries and ineffectiveness, I get it. Receivers dropping passes, I get it. Joe Flacco not always showing the best footwork, I get it. Very clear that there were other issues at work here, but even the most objective person seeing this offense had to be saying, I'm not sure Mark Trestman's putting this team in the best position.
Well, one of this is we don't see Flacco audible much, right? We see Flacco come up to the line of scrimmage, and we don't see him say, I don't like this play. Let's go to a different play.
That's been for a large stretch of his career, though. I mean, that's something that we talked about with Cam. We talked about that with Kubiak. We talked about that with Caldwell. But, I mean, regardless, I mean, and, we certainly can get into all the different minutia, and we'll see how things look.
And we are playing with offensive line that's a mess, right? I mean, let's... with all fairness to Trestman,
fault,
right.
But I think, again, as I said, as much as I felt he deserved a pass last year, this wasn't working, and it wasn't coming close to working. And at 3-2, you can either wait to see if things turn around and lose a couple more games in the process, if you're convinced that this guy really isn't your guy, or you make the change and maybe Marty Mornhinweg, not saying he'll be the long-term solution necessarily beyond this year even, but maybe you can at least salvage your offense, play better, and keep yourself in position to still make a playoff run and be an improved offense, even if you're not going to be a top 5 unit.
He is Luke Jones. He'll be on the backfields in Owings Mills. Press conferences on Monday afternoon. We got C.J. Mosley at Buffalo Wild Wings on Tuesday. Last thing for you on the Flacco's comfort level, and I know I began with that, and we may have addressed that through all this. And I don't want to say that Flacco runs the kingdom, but he is the $30 million quarterback. It's very, very clear they're going to win or lose with him or with his comfort level or with him being in a position to be effective. I would think that this, Joe Flacco has a role in this. There's a little bit of the blood of Mark Trestman on his hands as well, because I have to think this runs through his department. At this point in his career and where they are invested in him, his comfort level should be of utmost concern to everyone. And he's in no way a prima donna or probably running around there demanding anything. But I would think that this is something to make him comfortable.
Yeah, I mean, do I think Joe Flacco is the one who, made the decision or anything like that? No, of course not. But it had to be evident.
I think he gets a vote. I really do. I think he gets a vote. I mean, maybe not a big vote, but he's heard in this. I have to believe that.
I don't think John Harbaugh says to Joe Flacco, do you think we need to fire Mark? I
agree with that.
Based on how he's answered questions before as far as Flacco's level of involvement when they hired Kubiak and with Trestman, I've never gotten a sense that Joe Flacco is that involved in making a coaching hire or making a coaching change. But it's very clear that John Harbaugh, I would assume, had collected information and had a good gauge on what the working relationship was like between Trestman and Flacco and between Flacco and Marty Mornhinweg, in the same way that he knew that Flacco worked well with the likes of Hugh Jackson and Zorn and, go down the list, Rick Dennison and Gary Kubiak. So I think he knew, and, I'm sure certainly Joe Flacco has discussions with the coaching staff about the offense in general. So, I think it was clear that there was frustration there. I think it was clear that this wasn't the best working relationship, even if there wasn't some smoking gun moment that was reported or anything like that. But I think, put it this way. I'm guessing Joe Flacco's not waking up to this news, the Monday morning news and saying, I don't like this decision. I don't think Joe's celebrating it necessarily or anything like that because he's not that kind of guy. But I think this is something that would have been done with Harbaugh knowing he'd have the support of his quarterback in making this kind of a change.
All right, we got plenty to talk about as John Harbaugh will be talking about this. Luke will be on the backfields at Owings Mills all week, as will I on Wednesday. And, of course, the Ravens headed to New York to take on the Giants on Sunday. We have some space on our WNST bus. If you want to jump on the bus and go up with us, throw us a note, nasty at WNST.net. You can also just buy the trip on the Trips tab at WNST.net. The Buy a Toyota Audio Vault is there for you 24 hours a day from anywhere in the world. You can download, listen when you want, where you want, how you want, to what you want, from wherever you are. And it's all brought to you by buyatoyota.com. You can download that TuneIn Radio app as well. Morning newspaper, 7 a.m. It hits your email inbox. That's brought to you by Planet Fitness at planetfitness.com. Still $10 a month to get in the best shape of your life. Now, if you were on the WNST text service, you know how good it is. At 9:33 a.m., and I'm holding it up to our camera here at Facebook Live, this is what it looks like. Ravens fire offensive coordinator Mark Trestman, replacing with Marty Mornhinweg, according to ESPN, Coons 4 to Baltimore. That was at 9:33 a.m. We do it pretty quickly around here. You got to sign up. It is all brought to you by Coons Ford of Security Boulevard. Of course, Dennis will be here on Thursday, driving you home from 3 until 5 and getting you ready for Thursday night football and for some playoff baseball. And, of course, for the Ravens and the G-Men at MetLife Stadium on Sunday. Nasty at WNST.net reaches me. CJ Mosley on Tuesday night with us at Buffalo Wild Wings and Owings Mills. We are there, of course, every Monday night for Best Seat in the House as well as our wing eating competition. So I'm on the scene for all of that and more. Anything else to plug or tell you about? No, I think that's pretty much it. I'm Nestor. This is WNST.net, AM 1570 and WNST Towson, Baltimore, and we never stop talking Baltimore sports.